Buckle up, folks, because you're about to hear a jaw-dropping story of justice in action. Cop harasses black woman at airport, unaware she's an undercover FBI agent. Meet Naeen Campbell, a poised, brilliant black woman traveling alone through the bustling corridors of JFK International Airport in New York City. Surrounded by the frantic energy of delayed flights and tense passengers, she maintains a careful balance between humility and quiet confidence. Dressed in a casual sweatshirt and jeans, she seems like an ordinary traveler. But here's the kicker: she's far from ordinary. She's an undercover FBI agent returning from a high-stakes mission. When an overzealous airport cop singles her out and unleashes a hailstorm of harassment, he has no idea he's just made the biggest mistake of his career. Naeen Campbell had always loved the organized chaos of airports. From a young age, she found fascination in the swirl of voices, some anxious, some hopeful, all busy with the excitement or tension of travel. JFK International Airport in New York City was no exception. She had just landed after a 5-hour cross-country flight from Los Angeles, sitting by the airplane window, marveling at how the sun turned the horizon into swatches of pink, orange, and purple as she soared above the clouds. This time, she wasn't flying for a leisurely visit or a family reunion. She had been in Los Angeles closing out a major undercover operation involving an international money laundering ring. Though only a select few in the Federal Bureau of Investigation knew the extent of her involvement and success, Naeen took comfort in her anonymity. She wore a simple gray sweatshirt, fitted jeans, comfortable sneakers, and carried a small rolling suitcase plus a well-worn backpack. Stepping off the jet bridge and into the terminal, Naeen caught a glimpse of herself in a row of large glass windows. Her sharp jawline and short, close-cropped hair suited her well. The style was both practical and stylish, making her stand out in some settings, but not always in the way she wanted. She was aware that, to some, her mere presence radiated strength and confidence, which could be unsettling. Despite those occasional uneasy stares, she had learned over the years not to shrink or apologize for her presence in the world. The seatbelt sign had barely switched off upon landing before her phone buzzed. A text message from her direct superior at the FBI read, "Good work, Naeen. Report to HQ when you land." She glanced at it, typed back a quick acknowledgement, and slipped the phone into her back pocket. She had done her job over 2 years of infiltration to gather crucial intelligence, and now it was time to debrief. In her mind, she rehearsed how she would succinctly communicate the last pieces of the operation to her superiors. It was 7:30 a.m., and the morning rush at JFK was in full swing. Sleep-deprived travelers moved with varying degrees of urgency. The floor shone with the reflection of thousands of overhead lights, and announcements about flights echoed from overhead speakers. Naeen took a deep breath and strolled toward the baggage claim area. Even though she had no checked luggage, her carry-ons were sufficient for her stealth missions, keeping her agile and minimizing any potential disruptions. She wasn't expecting trouble. After so many missions, traveling had become second nature. But hold on tight, because fate had something else in store for her today. Tucked near a Starbucks kiosk was a uniformed police officer scanning the crowd. Officer Ronald Mendez, a short-tempered, 15-year veteran of airport security detail, stood stiffly with a coffee in one hand and a radio in the other. He observed passengers carefully. Some recognized him and made a wide berth, suspecting he was in one of his moods. Others brushed past him, too lost in their own frantic schedules to notice the rigid man. Officer Mendez had grown weary of the routine. Instead of patrolling local streets and wearing the proud shield of the NYPD, he'd been relegated to the drudgery of airport policing after a series of misconduct complaints. To him, everything about travelers annoyed him: the loud talkers, the seat switchers, the incessant phone calls, even the kids running around with backpacks bigger than themselves. He had let his sense of pride warp into resentment, and resentment had begun to solidify into bitterness. When his hawk-like gaze landed on Naeen, he frowned. She was alone, beautiful, with an air of quiet authority. That intangible presence piqued his interest and suspicion. Naeen walked with a kind of purposeful stride that stood out from the anxious hustle around her. "Something off," he muttered to himself. "Way too confident." He took another sip of coffee, bitter in flavor and in mood. Without a word, Mendez followed her at a distance, weaving through the throng of travelers. As he trailed her, his mind conjured scenarios. Maybe she was a drug mule. Maybe she was a mule for something else. Maybe she was a con artist. He had no concrete evidence, just a hunch. But that hunch was driven more by prejudice than by genuine police instinct. Naeen, sensing the heat of someone's gaze, glanced around. She caught a fleeting image of Mendez's uniform but didn't dwell on it. Cops, TSA officers, and other security personnel were hardly a novelty in an airport. She continued calmly, scanning the overhead signs for the route to ground transportation while rolling her suitcase across the tile. Naeen heard a stern voice at her shoulder. "Ma'am, excuse me." She turned to see Officer Mendez's blue eyes glaring at her from beneath heavy, furrowed brows, his face etched with suspicion. It immediately put Naeen on alert. Clutching the handle of her suitcase, she managed a polite but guarded smile. "Yes, officer?" Mendez gave her a once-over. "I need to see your ID and your boarding pass." Naeen's expression remained calm. She was no stranger to random checks, especially at airports, but she also knew that protocol typically required TSA staff or designated officers, not random airport police, to demand ID unless something more specific was going on. "May I ask why you need to see it?" she responded evenly. "Random inspection," Mendez said, his voice firm. "Now, I won't ask again." Naeen's chest tightened. She could have just handed him her credentials, her actual FBI credentials, and blown the entire conversation out of the water. But that would blow her cover too. She was still technically undercover until her debrief. Although her mission in LA was complete, there were standard procedures to follow. Besides, her entire infiltration was at a crucial juncture, and she had to be absolutely certain not to compromise ongoing investigations or risk exposure to the criminals she had just left behind. Officially, she was traveling as Naeen Walker, a consultant for a legal firm. Remaining cooperative and unflappable, she calmly produced her driver's license and boarding pass. "Here you go, officer." Mendez stared at the license, lifting an eyebrow. "Naeen Walker, from Washington, D.C. Business or pleasure in L.A.? "Business," Naeen replied. "I'm a consultant." Mendez scribbled the information in a small notebook. "What's the nature of your consulting work?" Naeen paused, a half-smile playing on her lips. "Legal research, mostly." "Sensitive documents." Mendez's disapproving sniff filled the silence. "Sensitive, right." He continued to scrutinize her driver's license, flipping it over as if he expected it to reveal secrets. Then, with an air of forced politeness, he handed it back. "Okay, Miss Walker. Mind if I have a look at your bags?" At that request, Naeen's spine stiffened. She wasn't carrying anything incriminating, she was meticulous about her covers, but the idea of letting this strange, hostile cop rifle through her personal belongings was both invasive and uncalled for. She knew airport authorities had a right to request a search if there was probable cause or suspicion, but everything about Mendez's demeanor told her that his suspicion wasn't grounded in fact. It was likely a prejudiced hunch. "I'd prefer not to, officer," she said politely. "I've just come through TSA, and I have a connecting ride soon." "Unless there's a specific reason?" "It's a routine check," Mendez snapped. "If you have nothing to hide, you should have no problem, right?" Naeen suppressed a surge of irritation. Was she going to escalate or comply? Every second spent under Mendez's scrutiny increased the risk that someone might spot her real identity. Yet refusing might also escalate tensions. "All right," she acquiesced, forcing a calm tone. "But can we do this in a more private area?" The corners of Mendez's mouth twisted, possibly disappointed that she didn't resist more. He led her into a nearby corridor, out-cowlock the main flow of traffic. Another officer, whose uniform bore the name Morales, glanced in their direction. Naeen watched as Mendez signaled him, and Morales politely pretended not to see. Clearly, Mendez had a reputation for these random checks, one that not all colleagues appreciated or shared. Inside the corridor, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Mendez started rifling through her rolling suitcase in a manner that could only be described as aggressive. Naeen kept her composure, but she silently fumed at the disregard for her belongings. He found her toiletry bag, standard items. He swabbed it for residue, a standard test for explosives or drugs. Then he emptied her neatly folded clothes, a black blouse and slacks that she'd worn to a covert meeting in LA, a sweatshirt she wore on the plane, a small toiletry kit. Next came her laptop, a nondescript one used solely for her cover job. "You say you're a legal consultant," Mendez said, powering on the laptop. "Mind if I take a look?" Naeen hesitated. On one hand, the machine was thoroughly scrubbed to contain no direct FBI references or hidden compartments. On the other hand, any attempt to access the files would prompt various encryption protocols. The moment Mendez tried to open a specific document, it would be flagged. Could that arouse more suspicion? "You're crossing a line," Naeen said evenly. "Airport police do not typically have authority to search electronic devices without probable cause, especially once I've passed TSA." Mendez sneered, ignoring her protest. He typed on the keyboard, but his access was blocked. The laptop's main login required a password, and he was locked out after a few tries. His frustration mounted. "Look, Miss Walker," he snapped, "our job is to ensure safety. We've had an uptick in suspicious activity recently." Naeen took a breath. "I understand safety is a priority, but do you suspect me of a crime, officer?" She locked eyes with Mendez, unwavering. In that second, she saw the flicker of hostility, as if he realized he was losing the moral high ground. The truth was that he had no substantial justification. This was an abuse of authority. "If you're not hiding something, open your laptop," he demanded. Naeen exhaled slowly. "I have sensitive legal files, confidential, privileged client information." "It's airport procedure," he insisted, though he sounded increasingly unsure. "I can't let you go until you open it." Naeen paused. She wanted to avoid confrontation, but there was a line to be drawn. "I'll show you the home screen," she said, "but that's as far as it goes without a warrant." With a quick keystroke, she typed her passcode and let him see the desktop. It contained a few standard folders labeled Client Docs, Research, Invoices. She clicked open a random file labeled Case Summaries 2021, which simply contained redacted text enough to look official but not enough to reveal any real data about her job. Mendez scanned it, flipping through random pages. He couldn't glean anything from it. Growing bored, he snapped the laptop shut. "Fine," he said. "You can pack up." Naeen carefully stowed her clothes back in the suitcase, her hands trembling slightly at the blatant harassment. Still, she forced a neutral expression. She had endured far worse in her line of work, but that didn't lessen the sting of being singled out for no valid reason, particularly given her race and the assumptions that might be fueling this interaction. Finally, Mendez waved dismissively. "Next time, Miss Walker, cooperate from the start." Without waiting for a response, he turned and walked away. Naeen exhaled, tension still buzzing in her nerves. She zipped her suitcase closed, muttering under her breath, "What was that all about?" She had no idea that this was only the beginning. Once free of the corridor, Naeen checked her phone. She was supposed to meet an FBI contact in the arrival section. The text from her superior recommended she ride in a nondescript black SUV to the Federal Plaza offices. The sooner she got out of JFK, the better. But as she approached the exit, she caught a glimpse of Officer Mendez again. He was talking to another passenger, a young man who looked Middle Eastern, and from a distance, she saw Mendez's posture rigid, confrontational, and loud. The man seemed alarmed. Passers-by hurried by, eyes averted, as Mendez demanded paperwork. Naeen felt a twinge of guilt. After all the training she had received, she was ingrained with the principle, see something, say something. The officer's behavior was, at best, questionable and, at worst, indicative of racial profiling. Normally, she would keep walking, but a quiet sense of duty tugged at her. Should she risk getting further entangled? Stay focused, she told herself. You have a mission. But her conscience wouldn't let her walk away, especially after the humiliating experience she had just endured. She decided to discreetly observe from the sidelines, pulling out her phone as though waiting for a call. With a pointed finger, Mendez barked, "Let me see your passport." "I don't care if you have a green card, I want your passport." The young man, stuttering, said, I didn't bring my passport. I'm a U.S. citizen. I have my driver's license. His eyes pleaded with bystanders for help, but everyone shied away. Naeen clenched her jaw, stepping a bit closer. If Mendez was once again overstepping boundaries, should she intervene? At that moment, another uniformed officer, Morales, approached, a worried expression on his face. She saw Mendez glance at Morales and stiffen. Morales spoke softly, apparently asking Mendez to de-escalate. Mendez huffed, shot the terrified young man a glare, and then stormed off. The young man stood there, shaken. Morales patted him on the shoulder, guiding him away. It was a fleeting yet important glimpse into the daily injustices happening under Mendez's watch. Naeen's blood boiled. Still, she realized that confronting Mendez directly right then could jeopardize her anonymity. She sighed, turned, and walked to the arrival zone. This story, however, was far from over. 15 minutes later, Naeen found the black SUV idling at the curb. She recognized the driver, Agent Daniel Park, a trustworthy colleague who had once worked with her on an operation in Seattle. They exchanged quick greetings, and Naeen tossed her suitcase into the back seat. "How was LA?" Park asked, merging into the chaotic traffic outside JFK. "Successful," Naeen replied. "We got what we needed. But I had an unfortunate run-in just now." Park raised an eyebrow. "Something that needs our attention?" "An airport cop singled me out for a random search." "Didn't feel random. I believe his name was Mendez." Park frowned. "Never heard of him, but there's always the occasional overzealous officer. Or biased." Naeen muttered, "He was harassing a young man too. Looked like a pattern." Park nodded, the lines on his face tightening. "You want to file a formal complaint?" Naeen hesitated. "I'm not sure. I've got bigger fish to fry, but maybe it's worth mentioning. If he's harassing people, that's a problem." Park sighed. "Indeed. Let's handle your debrief first. We've got a busy day." Naeen stared out the window as Park navigated the roadways, weaving in and out of thick lines of cars honking incessantly. Her thoughts drifted back to the confrontation with Mendez. It's not like she'd never encountered racism or harassment before, but something about Mendez's demeanor, especially the way he targeted that young man, made her uneasy. She knew from experience that some forms of corruption could run deep, and corruption that thrived under a badge could be particularly insidious. Naeen spent the next few hours at the FBI field office near Federal Plaza. She handed over the files, gave a thorough debrief of her role in dismantling the West Coast money laundering chain, and answered a flurry of questions from her superiors about potential next steps in the larger investigation. As she spoke, everything seemed to hum with the usual efficiency: agents, analysts, and supervisors coming and going with that single-minded focus on justice. But despite the triumphant mood about her successful mission, Naeen couldn't shake off the leftover tension from her morning. Later that afternoon, she ran into Special Agent in Charge Victoria Reese, a sharp, no-nonsense leader who had mentored Naeen early in her career. Reese was in her mid-50s, with silver strands weaving through her dark brown hair and a reputation for fairness. After a quick update, Reese noticed Naeen's unsettled demeanor. "Everything all right, Naeen?" Reese asked. Naeen gave a tight-lipped smile. "Just a run-in with an airport cop. He was harassing me and another traveler. Racial profiling, it seemed." Reese's eyes hardened. "You want me to get someone on it?" "I don't want to blow it out of proportion, but there's something about him that rubs me wrong," Naeen said. "His name is Ronald Mendez. I want to check if there have been complaints." Reese nodded. "I'll make a few calls. No one is above the law, especially not cops who might be stepping out of line." With that, Naeen felt a measure of relief. The FBI had no direct oversight over airport police in a day-to-day sense, but they could certainly look into repeated misconduct or civil rights violations if it crossed certain thresholds. She left the office with the comforting thought that she'd done the right thing by telling Reese. Early the next morning, Naeen returned to JFK for yet another flight, this time to Washington, D.C., to finalize the final stage of her mission. Under normal circumstances, she might have taken the train, but her superiors had requested her presence urgently. Still feeling uneasy about Mendez, she arrived extra early, hoping to bypass any drama. She checked in, cleared TSA smoothly, and grabbed a coffee at a chain cafe. With an hour to spare, she settled in a corner near a large picture window. Outside, airplanes moved slowly across the tarmac, their engines droning. Her phone rang. Agent Reese. Naeen answered quickly. "Good morning, ma'am." Reese's voice was resolute. "Naeen, we ran a preliminary check on Officer Ronald Mendez. We found multiple complaints. He's been flagged by the city's Civilian Complaint Review Board for use of excessive force and alleged racial profiling. He was transferred from the NYPD precinct to airport duty about 5 years ago after some internal investigations." Naeen's jaw tightened. "I suspected as much. Thank you for the update. If we find more, I'll let you know," Reese continued. "In the meantime, keep your head down. I understand you're traveling again. Just be cautious." "I don't trust that man." Naeen thanked her and ended the call. A swirl of conflicting emotions. She felt vindicated to an extent. Her instincts about Mendez's behavior were correct. But she also felt anxious, remembering how easily he'd singled her out. The possibility of crossing paths with him again made her uneasy. No sooner had she ended the call than she sensed a presence behind her. She glanced over her shoulder, and there he was, Officer Ronald Mendez, walking the terminal, scanning faces. Their eyes met, and Naeen's heart jolted. She looked away, hoping he wouldn't recognize her, but it was too late. She saw a flicker of recognition in his narrowed gaze. Without hesitation, Mendez altered his path and strode straight toward her. Naeen's pulse quickened, and she had a split-second decision: stand her ground or walk away. She decided to remain composed, letting him approach. "So, Miss Walker, back again," Mendez said, crossing his arms. "You sure do travel a lot for a consultant." Naeen forced a thin smile. "It's a busy season for me." "Something I can do for you, officer?" Mendez's lips curled in a smirk. "Just keeping an eye out, making sure people don't slip through the cracks." He glared at her coffee cup as though it might contain contraband. "Where are you heading this time?" Naeen refused to cower. "Washington, D.C." Mendez looked her up and down. "You mind if I ask a few questions?" Naeen sighed internally. She noticed passers-by giving them curious looks. "What kind of questions, officer?" He leaned closer, dropping his voice. "Let's make this simpler. I think you're suspicious. Let me see your ticket." She hesitated. She had no desire to provoke him, but neither did she want to keep submitting to his intimidation tactics. She took out her boarding pass, not wanting a scene. "Fine," she said curtly. Mendez snatched it, studied it as if it were a forged treasure map, and then let out a soft, Seat 14A, departing at 9:45. He read aloud. "You do know that you're supposed to wait at your gate, right? Instead of lurking around." Naeen's temper flared. "Officer, it's an airport. I'm allowed to sit where I like until boarding. Is this conversation going anywhere?" Mendez handed back the boarding pass. "Watch your tone." By now, the tension around them was palpable. A few onlookers slowed their steps, sensing that the confrontation was becoming heated. Naeen felt her muscles coil, adrenaline seeping into her veins. She couldn't blow her cover by flashing her FBI badge, but the desire to put him in his place was overwhelming. She took a long, steadying breath. "Have a nice day, officer," she said, turning away. She wasn't about to let him derail her flight. She had a job to do in D.C. Mendez didn't follow, but she could feel the weight of his stare like a target pinned to her back. She had no idea that this would spiral into something far bigger than a hostile exchange of words. Naeen arrived at gate B27 and found a seat. She immersed herself in her phone, checking last-minute emails from her FBI team. Though she kept her face neutral, a potent undercurrent of anger and unease still simmered within. It was one thing to deal with criminals in her line of work; she expected them to be dangerous, but an abusive cop under the guise of authority? That churned her stomach. 20 minutes before boarding, an announcement crackled over the intercom. Attention, passengers on Flight 483 to Washington, D.C. We regret to inform you of a slight delay due to mechanical checks. We anticipate a 30-minute wait. Thank you for your patience. A collective groan rippled through the waiting area. Naeen sighed but chose to see the silver lining. A slight delay was better than a mid-flight emergency. She glanced around for somewhere to grab water and maybe use the restroom. After buying a bottle of water at a nearby kiosk, she stepped into the women's restroom. Just as she was washing her hands, she heard scuffling sounds from outside in the corridor. Raised voices echoed against the bathroom's tiled walls. Curious, Naeen finished up quickly and walked out to see a commotion. Officer Mendez, standing off with a tall black man in a suit. The man was protesting as Mendez demanded identification. People were watching, wide-eyed. Naeen's heart sank. Another scene. The man was older, perhaps mid-50s, dignified. He had dropped his carry-on bag in surprise. Mendez was spewing questions. Where are you coming from? Why so nervous? Show me your ID. The man tried to remain calm, but frustration was evident in his voice. Officer, I'm not nervous. I'm startled by your aggression. I'm a corporate attorney traveling to D.C. for business. My name is Henry Briggs. Mendez cut him off. I don't like your tone, Mr. Briggs. Cooperation goes a long way. Something inside Naeen snapped. Enough was enough. She couldn't stand idly by while Mendez harassed yet another person, apparently also a person of color. The pattern was too glaring. She stepped forward, speaking loudly enough for others to hear. Officer, what's the reason for this stop? He's clearly not posing a threat. Mendez whirled around, eyes blazing as he recognized her. Well, look who's decided to play Good Samaritan. Back off, Miss Walker. This doesn't concern you. Henry Briggs seemed relieved to see someone intervene on his behalf. Thank you, he said softly to Naeen. Naeen squared her shoulders. There's a difference between caution and profiling, Officer Mendez. Unless you have probable cause, you're out of line. The tension ratcheted up. Mendez's radio crackled, but he ignored it. Bystanders had their phones out, filming. Naeen could sense that Mendez was dangerously close to losing control of the situation and maybe himself. You think you know the law? Mendez hissed. If you interfere with an investigation, I'll arrest you, Miss Walker. Naeen lifted her hands in a gesture of calm. She knew she was walking a razor's edge. If Mendez tried to place her under arrest, she could reveal her FBI identity, but that would certainly escalate matters. At the same time, she was loath to let him continue trampling on people's rights. Briggs, regaining composure, offered his driver's license. Here is my ID, officer. I'm not resisting. I just want to know why you're singling me out. Mendez snatched it, looked at it, and then shoved it back at Briggs. Fine, he snapped. This is a warning. Keep walking. Briggs retrieved his bag, shooting Naeen a grateful glance, then walked away, heading toward a different gate. Mendez turned his gaze on Naeen, pure fury contorting his features. You think you're a hero, Miss Walker? He asked sarcastically. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Next time, keep your nose out of it. He stomped off, leaving Naeen shaken. She realized with a sinking feeling that she had further antagonized a man who already seemed to have a vendetta against her. But letting him terrorize innocent people was never an option. Boarding finally began. Naeen exhaled, grateful to leave JFK behind. She turned off her phone and tucked it into her pocket as she entered the jet bridge. She placed her backpack in the overhead compartment and settled into her window seat, trying to relax. The flight to D.C. was only about an hour, and she'd be out of this tension-filled environment, free to focus on her mission's final steps. But as the plane taxied away from the gate, Naeen's mind kept drifting back to Mendez. Something about the darkness in his eyes gave her chills. This wasn't a simple matter of an ordinary cop. She sensed that his hatred for certain people ran deep and had festered into an unchecked abuse of power. and she couldn't shake the feeling that their paths might cross again. Over the next week in D.C., Naeen completed her final mission tasks, concluding reports, transitioning documents, and participating in strategy sessions for upcoming operations. Yet, despite her busy schedule, she frequently thought about Officer Mendez. She found herself checking news headlines, half expecting to see a story about an altercation at JFK. Nothing. Just routine coverage of flight delays and new airline policies. By the 8th day, she received a phone call from an unknown number. When she answered, a familiar male voice came on the line. "Miss Walker, it's Henry Briggs. I got your number from a friend at the Department of Justice who said you might be able to help." Surprised, Naeen asked, "How can I help you, Mr. Briggs?" He explained with a trembling voice that he wanted to file a formal complaint against Mendez for racial profiling and harassment, especially after seeing multiple online discussions from travelers who'd experienced something similar. He'd also discovered that Mendez had a concerning history in the NYPD. Briggs wanted to rally more victims to take a stand. "I'm prepared to do whatever it takes," Briggs said. "But I need to know if you'd be willing to provide a statement about what you witnessed. You stood up for me and saw how he behaved." Naeen paused. As an undercover FBI agent, stepping into the public spotlight against a particular cop was risky. However, her direct superiors already knew about the incident, and she strongly believed in justice. Still, she needed to handle it carefully. "I can't discuss certain details of my background," Naeen said carefully, "but I can verify that I was a witness to Mendez's conduct that day. Let me check with my chain of command first. I'll call you back." After hanging up, Naeen took a deep breath. Her sense of duty tugged at her heart. She quickly dialed Special Agent Reese to relay Briggs's request and her own thoughts. Reese was silent for a moment. "Naeen, we both know you can't blow your undercover status, but if we handle this properly, you might be able to provide testimony as a civilian witness using your legal cover identity. We can keep your FBI role out of it, and maybe we can coordinate with internal affairs or an oversight division on Mendez. Let me see what channels are available." Though complicated, Naeen felt relief flood her. Standing up to abuse of power was exactly why she joined the FBI. She might have to do it quietly, but she would do it. 2 weeks passed. Naeen juggled her standard FBI responsibilities with the possibility of testifying in a complaint hearing. She maintained contact with Henry Briggs, who reported that the Civilian Complaint Review Board had agreed to look into Mendez. In the meantime, he was gathering statements from other travelers. Some were afraid to speak up, but a few had harrowing tales of harassment and intimidation that mirrored Naeen's own experiences. During this period, Naeen heard nothing from Mendez. She had hoped their fateful encounters were over. But that changed one early morning when she flew back to New York for an urgent meeting at the local field office. After landing at JFK, Naeen took a cautious route. She had purposely worn a baseball cap, a hoodie, and dark sunglasses to conceal her identity. As she walked to baggage claim, the chatter of travelers and the whir of luggage carousels filled the air. The environment felt as hectic as always, but she tried to be inconspicuous. Then she heard a voice that made her freeze. "Nice disguise, Miss Walker." She turned slowly. There, behind her, was Mendez. He wore that same contemptuous smirk, and her heart thundered in her chest. How had he recognized her? "You never learn, do you?" Mendez said quietly, stepping closer. Naeen willed her expression to remain neutral. "Is there a reason you're following me again, officer?" He leaned in, the faint smell of cigarette smoke and stale coffee clinging to him. "Word on the street is you've been making trouble for me, going around telling your little sob stories about so-called harassment." Naeen's throat tightened. How had he discovered her involvement in Briggs's complaint? She had been so careful to keep her real identity separate. Unless someone at the review board let it slip that Naeen Walker was one of the potential witnesses, or perhaps Mendez had recognized Henry Briggs from that day and started digging. "I'm not sure what you mean," she said, forcing a calm she didn't feel. Mendez's eyes burned into hers. "Don't play coy, Miss Walker. People like you love to cry racism at every turn. You can't stand law and order." Maybe you don't realize just how many friends I have in this city. So watch your step. Naeen instinctively shifted to a defensive posture. She was well versed in self-defense if it came to it, but the public setting tempered the risk of physical aggression. Yet the threat in his voice was unmistakable. She had no illusions that Mendez was bluffing. Some cops with an unchecked sense of power believed they were untouchable. She let a pause hang in the air, letting the tension speak for itself. Finally, she responded, "Don't threaten me, Officer Mendez. You're only digging yourself a deeper hole." With that, she turned and walked away, not looking back. Her nerves were on high alert, but she managed not to break into a run. By the time she reached the taxi stand, her entire body trembled from the adrenaline surge. She hopped into a cab and gave the driver the address of the FBI's field office, her mind racing. Mendez had discovered her involvement in the complaint, and now lines were being drawn. Inside the safety of the field office, Naeen wasted no time in going straight to Special Agent Reese's office. She recounted what had just happened. Reese sat, hands folded, her expression grim. "This is worse than I thought," Reese said quietly. "He's making direct threats. That's intimidation of a witness, which is a federal offense. We have enough to open our own investigation." Naeen nodded, relief mixing with fear. "I'm not backing down, but I can't do this alone." Reese offered a reassuring smile. "You won't be. The Bureau takes intimidation very seriously, especially if it's from an officer who believes he's above the law." Over the next several days, Naeen gave a detailed statement to the FBI's internal team handling public corruption and civil rights violations. She also submitted an official affidavit to the Civilian Complaint Review Board, verifying her experiences. Henry Briggs continued to gather testimonies as well, coordinating with a team of lawyers specialized in civil rights. On the surface, it looked like justice was inching forward. Mendez was being called to a hearing, and multiple allegations against him were now under formal review. But for Naeen, the tension only escalated. She started noticing a suspicious sedan parked outside her building at odd hours. Sometimes, she'd see a figure that resembled Mendez loitering across the street, but whenever she tried to get a clearer view, he vanished. It could be her imagination, but her gut screamed danger. One rainy evening, Naeen left the field office later than usual. She was exhausted, longing for a warm bath. As she stepped onto the sidewalk, she clutched her umbrella, the rain pounding the streets in a rhythmic deluge. Foot traffic was sparse due to the weather, and her car was parked a few blocks away. Suddenly, she sensed movement to her left. A tall figure emerged from a nearby alley. Her adrenaline spiked when she realized it was Mendez, no uniform this time, just jeans, a leather jacket, and that hateful sneer. She stepped back, heart pounding. Her first instinct was to flash her FBI badge, but that was complicated. Her cover was still in place for other missions, and revealing her status to Mendez might trigger a dangerous reaction. Yet she also realized that if she was physically threatened, she had every right to defend herself and reveal who she truly was. He stepped closer, his voice low. "I warned you, Miss Walker. You should have kept quiet." Naeen tightened her grip on the umbrella, ready to use it as a weapon if needed. "This is assault, Officer Mendez. Do you really want to add that to your list of charges?" Rain streamed down their faces, thunder rumbling in the distance. Mendez seemed beyond reason, his lips trembling with rage. "Charges? No one's going to charge me. I've got union lawyers, people in high places. You're nobody." Naeen's mind raced, analyzing potential moves. She measured the distance between them, about 6 feet. She could strike with the umbrella, distract him, and run. But a primal indignation also flared. "Why should I run from a bully?" She spoke clearly, "You're mistaken if you think I'm alone. I have people watching out for me, and you're making a catastrophic error right now." Mendez laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Big words. You think you can just do whatever you want? If you keep messing with me, I'll come after you." And that was it, the threat she needed to hear. Naeen calmly reached into her jacket. Officer Mendez, I'm placing you under arrest for, he sneered, stepping forward. Under arrest? By who? You're just, she pulled out her FBI badge and held it in front of him. The golden letters glinted in the flickering streetlight. Thunder crackled overhead. Special Agent Naeen Campbell, FBI, she said, letting her voice ring with authority. That's who I am. You're done. For a split second, Mendez froze, shock contorting his features. Confusion, anger, and possibly fear whirled in his eyes. FBI, he whispered hoarsely. You lied. All this time, Naeen pressed on. Yes, I'm a federal agent, and I've documented every instance of your harassment and intimidation. Right now, you've threatened a federal witness in an ongoing investigation. I've also got probable cause to believe you may be stalking me. Put your hands where I can see them. He stared at her, chest heaving. For a moment, it looked like he might lunge. Naeen's heart beat so loudly she was sure he could hear it. She braced, ready to defend herself. She was trained in disarming suspects, but Mendez was a cop, likely trained too. This could get ugly fast. Suddenly, sirens pierced the night air. Red and blue lights painted the wet pavement. A black FBI SUV screeched to a halt. Out stepped Agent Daniel Park and two uniformed NYPD officers they had called in his backup. They approached swiftly, guns at the ready. Mendez's mouth twisted in rage, but he lifted his arms, perhaps realizing how outnumbered he was. Park moved in, reading Mendez his Miranda rights while the NYPD officers cuffed him. Mendez spat at the ground, glaring at Naeen. This isn't over, he snarled. Naeen, umbrella still in one hand, watched as the officers hauled him away. Rain washed down on her face, mixing with the adrenaline-fueled sweat. She felt relief, triumph, and sadness all at once. Park approached her. You okay? Naeen nodded, though her entire body shook with pent-up tension. I will be. In that moment, the storm's fury seemed to match the magnitude of the confrontation. At last, the man who believed himself above the law was in custody. Naeen felt a sense of vindication not just for herself, but for all those he had terrorized. What followed was a whirlwind of legal procedures. Mendez faced charges for harassment, witness intimidation, and additional civil rights violations from past incidents that finally came to light. The Civilian Complaint Review Board's inquiry became a formal criminal case, coordinated with the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. Witnesses like Henry Briggs and others who had been harassed testified in front of a grand jury. Naeen, using her formal title as Special Agent Naeen Campbell, gave her account of the events at JFK and her final confrontation with Mendez. Although she had to be selective in what she revealed due to her undercover status in other operations, her testimony was still powerful. She recounted how he repeatedly singled out travelers of color, used intimidation, and explicitly threatened her life when she tried to stand up. Over time, more victims came forward, ranging from a college student wrongly accused of drug possession to a young mother forced into a humiliating strip search under Mendez's orders. The stories painted a chilling picture of a man who systematically abused the power entrusted to him. Mendez, meanwhile, attempted to paint himself as a zealous officer dedicated to public safety, but the overwhelming evidence suggested otherwise. In the months that followed, the karmic scales tipped heavily against Mendez. Not only did he lose his job, but he was also found guilty on several felony counts. Sentencing day arrived, and the courtroom buzzed with journalists, activists, and attorneys. Naeen didn't attend in person. Undercover obligations pulled her away, but she heard that Mendez received several years in federal prison, an outcome that many saw as a strong statement against police misconduct. For Naeen, life continued in the fast lane of FBI operations. She found herself reassigned to a new undercover detail in Miami, focusing on a cybercrime ring. Though the mission was brand new, the sense of justice she felt from the Mendez case lingered like a warm ember. Occasionally, she received updates from Henry Briggs, who had become something of a vocal advocate for police reform. He reached out to others who suffered from profiling and helped them navigate the legal processes. The two formed an unlikely friendship, rooted in their shared stand against Mendez's misconduct. One afternoon, while Naeen was in her Miami office finishing up some paperwork, she opened an email. It was from Briggs, a simple message that read, "Thank you for everything. Because of you, a lot of people can fly without fear. Keep doing what you do, Miss Campbell." Naeen smiled. She thought back to the day she first encountered Mendez. Who would have guessed that a routine arrival at JFK would trigger such a colossal fight for justice? She closed her laptop, grabbed her jacket, and headed out into the Florida sunshine, ready for whatever mission awaited her next. She carried with her the unwavering conviction that justice, though often delayed, can indeed triumph. And that even in the shadows of prejudice and abuse, a single light, be it an FBI badge or just a compassionate bystander, can blaze a path forward. And there you have it, folks, the harrowing tale of one cop's corrupt reign, shattered by a single undercover FBI agent who refused to be silenced. Naeen's courage reminds us that true justice can only bloom when individuals are willing to stand up and demand accountability. Her journey through airport corridors and courtroom battles echoed the hopes and fears of countless travelers singled out merely for their skin color or perceived differences. In the end, Mendez faced the full force of the law, and all those he once terrorized found a voice. If this story stirred your heart or opened your eyes, please remember to like this video, share it with friends, and subscribe to Adam Alpha. Your support helps us shine a spotlight on real-life injustices and the extraordinary people who champion change. Together, we can spread these important messages far and wide. Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay informed and stay vigilant with Adam Alpha.